Welcome back. We had an obligation yesterday to report on the Suncoast recovery from Hurricane Irma, but let us never forget yesterday was also September 11th. In New York, at Ground Zero, the names of those lost that day were read out loud, as they are every year. Ceremonies as well at the Pentagon and at Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Joining us for more is former Sarasota Police Chief Pete Abbott, who is the executive officer to New York's Deputy Police Commissioner at the time, and Norm Schimmel, who worked so hard and so tirelessly on the Sarasota 9/11 Memorial. Both of you were in New York City on 9/11.
Close to.
As I was covering for ABC in Connecticut. Pete, just remind viewers, what were you doing at the time? What was the first moment you knew that something was terribly wrong?
Earlier in the morning, about 8:45 or 8:46, there was a big commotion on the police commissioner's side of police headquarters, and I was on the top floor on the other side, and usually very quiet over there, so I ran through the connecting door to see what was going on, and you could see the smoke pouring out of the North Tower. So I grabbed my stuff and I said, look, I'm going to just run over. It was faster to run than to drive, and see what's going on. I'll connect with Manhattan South Borough, and we'll let you know what's going on as soon as we get there. Because it was a clear day. It was kind of weird that a plane would go in without a cloud in the sky. I got close to the site, and then this big explosion, which was the second plane, and then that's when I knew it was not going to be a good day, because there was no accident at that point.
Norm, where were you?
Believe it or not, I was in Bono, Arkansas, listening to Mike and Mike in the morning, and
You New Yorkers will know exactly what Norm is talking about.
Memphis, and drove all night to get back. But in listening to them, they said plane has hit the tower, and like an accident, and all of a sudden they said a second plane has hit, and then they switched back to the network. I got into a car and never stopped driving, and my first sight was on the Jersey Turnpike of it. I can't even tell you how many hours I drove. I drove straight back. I was there. I got through the tunnel before they closed the tunnel off, and it's just more and more and more.
Point of personal reflection, I remember driving to work and hearing on News 88, traffic reporter Tom Kaminsky saying a small plane went into the tower, and I was sent directly there. I was by noontime. In fact, one of the buildings collapsed behind me as I was going live later in the day. Peter, 16 years later, have you had enough time to really, coalesce in terms of what you remember and what you want people to remember about, let's say, how New York responded that day?
I think it's very timely. You saw just recently what happened in Texas and what happened here in Florida and what happened in New York. All divisions between, whatever persuasion or political or whatever, it doesn't matter. When America becomes the target of something God created or man-made, people come together, and that's what I think is the most important thing. People really shine in those moments.
Norm, Pete makes an incredible point, because in so many ways right now it seems like our country is pulling apart, but when natural disasters like this take place, or man-made disasters like 9/11 take place, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Nothing to do with it.
And tell us, with the time we have left here, in terms of the Sarasota Memorial. I mean, it was different this year, but it's so important to so many people around here.
Well, unfortunately, we had to cancel because of the hurricane itself. But about 7 years ago, Commissioner Outwell and Shore, myself, the police department, the first responders, the sheriff, and everything, decided to have a memorial ceremony. There are retired fire people here. There's retired first responders here, too. And it has grown very, very much. Unfortunately, it was canceled this year, but it will be done in 2 weeks. And so every year, I go to New York. I'll be in New York on Friday, and I do a shooting, and we present a framed canvas, which is then unveiled and mounted into one of the federal buildings.
That's incredible. We are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on 9/11 and an extraordinary interview with former Florida Senator Bob Graham right after we check First Alert Weather, so stay with us. Our guests join us right now for final thoughts on September 11th. Pete, do you still talk regularly with people that you were with on that day in New York City?
I do. I've talked to the former First Deputy Commissioner Joe Dunn. We pretty much make that a date on the calendar where we just talk to each other. Gary McCarthy, who was recently the police superintendent in Chicago, we were together that day. John Odermatt just happened to call me today. He was the emergency operations chief. Just folks that we went through this together.
Let me ask you a quick question. What Bob Graham and so many others are trying to do in terms of finding out what the Sarasota connection was to the hijackers, do you think it's really important to get to the bottom of that?
Well, I think the truth is important, and if the FBI is redacting and not sharing that information, I would imagine is one of two reasons. One, there's a political reason, or two, there is a national security reason. Maybe somebody would be revealed in those papers that is situated in a place where they're doing good work for the American people.
Norma, I want to ask you the same question because you are a native New Yorker and you are now a longtime Sarasota resident, and so many crucial parts of this story happen in Sarasota and the Suncoast. Do you think it's important to find out what there is to find out?
I think in a way it's important just for the sake of history itself, and quite honestly, my strife is a little different or a little more important. And the evening of 9/11, my mother called me, 95 years old, and she simply said to me that my generation had just experienced their Pearl Harbor somewhat closer to home. I have a fear that we're forgetting December 7th, and what I'd like to make sure of is that we don't forget 9/11. And
Right.
that's my thrust.
You know, you said that the memorial is 2 weeks delayed because of the events of this past week, but you're committed to doing this every single year and making sure that Sarasota residents don't forget.
Absolutely, positively, and we remember everything involved. We remember the people. We remember the first responders. The way New Yorkers came together, like no one could ever figure that they could do. And it was a time of true unity, just unity, that's the word.
You know what would set me off in those days is when I was in Lower Manhattan and I would see an ambulance from my hometown, Pearl River, just up the road, but also seeing first responders from as far away from Florida and California.
Wyoming. Yeah, they were wonderful. And if you saw, by the way, if you saw a first responder, you brought a bottle of water. It was just...
Absolutely. We have to leave it there. FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Former Florida Senator Bob Graham, former Sarasota Police Chief Pete Abbott, who was a deputy for the executive officer for the Deputy Commissioner in New York City, and Norm Schimmel, who has worked so tirelessly on the Sarasota 9/11 Memorial.